Okay, we are starting with Rabbi Bezalel.
Okay, so last week I said I was going to get to something and I didn't get to it because we got carried away with Lashon Hara, no pun intended. And I wanted to start with the Orach Chaim, his interpretation. The Orach Chaim is Rav Chaim ben Attar. He's beloved by many, many Moroccan Jews. If you know any of them, you'll know that their favorite is the Orach Chaim. He lived in Morocco in the 1700s and is probably one of the most famous Mikubalim and Talmudic scholars ever to come out of Morocco. And his Parish on Chumash is very, very beautiful. And I saw something a few years ago when I was looking for a speech, for a potential speech on Parshas Kiteitzei that I never ended up speaking, but I kept it in my pocket for a few years. And I want to discuss it now because it's very unusual for the Orach Chaim to take a halachic chapter like the discussion of Motzi Shemra that's found in Parshas Kiteitzei and translate it allegorically as a mashal. And that's exactly what he does. And if you've never seen this before, I definitely recommend looking at it inside. And I'm going to read the whole thing. I don't care how long it takes because it's kind of important to me because it stresses everything I've been saying for the last year and a half or however long this has been going on, that, you know, that the importance of Torah and what it does for us, and kind of like how everything we do, you know, comes from here, and everything you see today and that goes on has a root somewhere in the Torah, and how important it is in our life. And he explains that the whole parsha of Motzi Shemra, starting from Dvarim, if you have a Chumash in front of you, it would certainly be helpful. If you look up Perek 22, verse 13 in Dvarim, that's where the whole discussion of Motzi Shemra, right, where you have the Nara, Basula, right, whose husband discovers that she's not a virgin, and he takes her to court. And if he's lying, so we have a penalty for him. And if he's not lying, unfortunately, then we give her the ultimate punishment, the death penalty. So the pasuk starts off by saying, Kikach ish isha uvalea usneya. I'm going to read most of it in English. I want to start at least with the first part in Hebrew, so I could say that we did it in Hebrew. Okay, here he goes. Kikach ish isha, I'm reading from the Orach Chaim. Dibra Torah keneged b'nei Adam, gam b'nei ish. The Torah here is addressing, okay, people, okay, and gam b'nei ish asher chozun p'nei min haTorah. The Torah is addressing people who have forgotten about the importance of Torah study. That's what this parsha is talking about. Okay, obviously it's talking about the rules of a man and a woman and Motzi Shemra, but this is almost like an allegory. It kind of reminds me of if you ever open up a like Hebrew English Shir HaShirim, like maybe an art scroll version, you would actually see that the translation of Shir HaShirim is a love story, but it's not taken literal, and every pasuk has a deeper meaning to it. And if you open up the art scroll, which I did once, it actually, it doesn't interpret the psukim the way it looks. It actually treats the allegory, the mashal, as the pashat pshat, which is very interesting. That shows you the degree of how Shir HaShirim, just to give an example, is treated. It's so not meant to be taken literally that even the art scroll English gives a summary of the mashal, okay, in English, and it doesn't even bother talking about the literal translation of the verses. So I just wanted to throw that out there. So this is what it reminds me of a little here. He's not going to talk at all about what you think he's going to talk about the rules of Motzi Shemra. He's going to talk about that this parsha is referring to people, okay, either the average person or the person who has forsaken Torah. Why? Ka'omram, because these people say ki hayom katzar, right? This is a common claim that you hear all the time. The day is short. There's only so many amount of hours in the day. And by the time when I wake up, get out of bed, go to work, come home after sitting in traffic, I have no time for Torah study, right? Shmuel, you've heard that before? This is probably the most common claim, a little bit, right? This is the most common claim, although today there are fewer and fewer excuses with all the podcasts and with all the daf yomis on your iPhone. It's getting harder to say this, but 500 years ago, you could certainly see how hard it was. Anyways, so he goes on to say that these are the people, shechorzu pnei min haTorah ka'omram, they see ki hayom katzar, the day is so short, lama shetzarich li'ishtadel al hamichya, and I have so much to worry about. I have to worry about a parnasa, right? I have to feed my family. On that person, this parsha of Motzi Shemra is said. Ba'aleim amar hakasav ki yikach ish isha. What does ki yikach ish isha mean? Zot haTorah hameorasa. Right. This is referring to when the man decides to take what's a meurasa. Remember the Gemara says al tikra, right? Morasha ela meurasa. Right. That Gemara. Meurasa means you're betrothed to someone. Here it is. You are connected to the Torah. You are engaged. You're a nara amorasa. You're a person who is engaged to Torah. Okay, or you're supposed to be engaged to Torah, because after all, it is our companion. Okay, and then what does the pasuk say? It says uba aleha, and he consummated this relationship. What does that mean? Shekvar zarcha alehem ora shel Torah bahar Sinai v'kibla haluchos. We made a deal with God to accept the Torah. So this is our quote unquote wife, this Torah of ours. Usneya. Unfortunately, we grew to hate her. We don't want to have the proper relationship with Torah, just like when you get married, the pasuk in Mishpatim tells you the Shera Ksusa Onasa, right? We're going to see that, I think, next week in the daf, right? You have to provide her with clothing, with relation, right? With food, with money, all kinds of things. We have a deal in place. And just like when you get married, there are responsibilities that the husband has, as we've seen for the last number of weeks. So too with the Torah, when we take the Torah as a companion, there are similar deals we have to have with the Torah. Okay? And he goes on and on and on, and I just have to read this because it's so great. And he says, I'm just going to read it in English just to make it quick. So again, he consummates this relationship, which has been initiated at the time all the Jewish souls stood out at Har Sinai when God revealed himself, when they got the Aseret Dibros, and now he hates it. He does not want to grant her the things which are due to his quote unquote wife as a matter of right, as spelled out in Parshas Mishpatim. Okay, when his wife wants to know why she does not receive her due, the husband, quote unquote, claims that she has not provided him with what he considers the obligation of any wife to her husband, food and drink. He claims that he does not observe that his devotion to Torah has paid any dividends. He says, like we said before, he's wasting his time doing it because he needs to work all the time. And he says this is a useless relationship. In fact, he claims that when he looks around at all his friends who have not adopted the Torah path, they all seem to be better than he is. This is what the Motzi Shemra is. He's Motzi Shemra on the Torah, and that's what the pasuk says, V'samla alila dvarim, right? He accuses her and gives her a bad name, saying, hey, I married this woman, okay, and now I got a big problem, okay? He does not deny having married the woman. He doesn't deny making the commitment, but he says, when I came near her, right, what does it say? I didn't find her besulim. Now, besula is the symbol of strength, right? He claims that people who relied on Torah were compelled to look elsewhere to find sustenance, okay? It just didn't do anything for him. I'm busy, okay? So what happens next? So now we have to get the father involved, okay? So the allegory continues. And he says the Torah replies that the wife's father, who's the wife's father? Who's the father of the Torah? God. So now God comes into play. He says, God and the community of Israel will defend her virtue before the Supreme Court. And the father and the mother will display the Besulim, the wife, proof that loyalty to Torah results in spectacular achievements by its adherents. Okay, and he goes on to say that the next paragraph, he says, God is described as the father of the virgin bride who has been subjected to unjust accusations, her groom denying her virginity at the time of marriage. The father of the bride, i.e. God, says, I have given, right, as biti natati li'ishazeh, he says, I given my daughter to this man. I mean, I gave them the Torah. Okay, I gave the Jews the Torah. Okay, usneya, and he hates her. The Torah explains that the immediate reason for the estrangement between Israel and the Torah, i.e. the husband and wife, is an emotion called hatred. The Torah also hints at the underlying reason, i.e. the apparent failure of the Torah to live up to the Israelites' expectations. And now he made an accusation against her. Okay, now we continue. So what happens? So if he really made an accusation, we know that he gets punished, right? It says v'yisroto, right? The Torah continues that the judgment for the Israelite who accuses Torah unjustly of having failed him will be pronounced by the court. In the first instance, he will receive 39 lashes. Okay, so how are we going to, how does the Or Chaim explain what the Malchus is for? So the Gemara in Brachos, a famous Gemara, Brachos Daf Hey, it talks about Yisurin. It says that when Yisurin, when pain comes to a person, he should think about what's going on in his life, right? When you're subject to afflictions, you have to examine your lifestyle in order to discover which sins you're guilty of. If he can't find a specific sin that he was guilty of, he should attribute his afflictions to having neglected Torah study. If he goes back and says, I did this, and I can't find myself sinning, so the default is Torah study. Okay, most commentators find this difficult to understand, claiming that inasmuch as neglect of Torah study is a grave sin, but how could the Talmud consider this a sin of last resort, something to fall back on, right? The answer is that the commandment of Torah study and its fulfillment is not one of the commandments that can be measured. Even if a person who had studied a relatively great amount of Torah and has devoted many hours cannot be sure that he had fulfilled his commandment adequately. In other words, it's never enough. Okay, so he gets Malchus, and then he gets 100 kesef, right? Remember, he has to pay, right? Even though you don't lokel mishalim, here's an exception, as we said. So what does the 100 kesef mean? They shall find him 100 shkalim. This is an allusion to the 100 brachos. Each one of us is meant to say every day, right? Based on a Gemara in Menachos, right? Because we use a gematria of Ma Hashem Shoal is Ma is really Mea, right? That verse spoke about a penitent. We know from Bereshis Rabbah that the word Va'ata refers to a penitent sinner. Va'ata Yisrael Ma Hashem Shoel Mimcha. And what do you have to do? And the elders shall give these 100 brachos to the father of the Besula, because he, the Jew, has slandered the Besula of Israel. It's referring to the Torah, and you shamed God in a way. Okay. Now, what's the other punishment that you're stuck with her? Remember, not only do you get malchus and you have to pay, it says v'lo tiyeh le'isha. So what does that mean? Although the commandment to study Torah is normally understood to involve setting aside certain parts of the day, a person who has rejected Torah study previously, okay, and thereby slighted the Torah, must occupy himself with honoring the Torah all day and all night. That means he can't send her away. You're stuck with it. Almost like tshuva. You have to do tshuva and now even learn more of it. Okay? This is applicable to people whose sins did not consist of insulting the Torah. In order to make up for the insult of Torah, which the person in our paragraph is guilty of, he has to devote himself exclusively to Torah. Now, what's the punchline of the whole story? Right? Because you can ask, okay, this is all if the husband, right, made up a story, he gets punished. But over here, the second half of the parasha talks about, well, what if the husband was telling the truth and she really did have an affair? So we know that her penalty is death. So how does this fit into the Orach Chaim? Ready for this? V'im emes hadavar, right? If the matter was true, if it turns out that the Torah which this person studied and which he examined and found defective, what was wrong with it? It was taught by heretics, such as a Torah taught by Tzadok and Baisos. Such Torah does not give man strength, but exerts a negative influence on him. And therefore God commands to stone such a Torah to death until it's dead. And he brings down the Gemara in Gittin that says, if a mummer or a heretic writes a Torah, the whole Torah has to be burnt. You have to put the Torah to death. As he did something despicable, when the Torah concludes our paragraph with the words, you should wipe out the evil from your midst, right? It refers to someone who deliberately distorts the meaning of the Torah. So I just wanted, that's the end of it. I just wanted to say how beautiful that Orach Chaim is, how he takes something that looks so, like obscure and out there, and he has an allegory and he explains it to something that we could all understand about our relationship with the Torah. And that is really why we are here studying as much as we can. So I hope everyone enjoyed that. Shmuel, have you heard that before? Okay. You don't have to
Beautiful, beautiful.
Beautiful. Have you heard that before?
No, never.
That's a
And I'm
Bleaking
even
special.
wondering, did he make up that midrash or did he see it? Did he cite it? Is it his
No,
finish?
it's not a medrash.
No, I'm saying it's his allegory, but did he
That's
see
his
it anywhere?
allegory. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah. I don't think, listen, I don't know every Orach Chaim, obviously. I look at him occasionally, but I can't think of any time where he takes a complete idea or paragraph from the Torah and uses the whole thing as a mashal. Okay, I thought that was interesting. So now we're going to start our class a little late, but this is also important. We're going to start with a Gemara in Kesubos, where else? Okay, on Daf Nun Beis, happened to be Shabbos's Daf. The topic of the discussion on page 52b, if you remember, the Mishnah was talking about the various Tanai Kesubos, okay, which are basically the conditions that the Kesuva brings down, that if for whatever reason it wasn't brought down in the Kesuva, the Chachamim made a takana, right? Whether a Kesuva is a Doraisa or a Durabanan, it doesn't really matter, but the Chachamim implored that certain conditions be said in the Kesuva. And one of them happened to be, if the wife got sick, then you would have to heal her. Okay, that sounds like a reasonable responsibility. After all, if the husband is supporting his wife, which is what the Kesuva is all about, then one would think that just like you have to feed her, you have to help her, right? Her therapy, her medication, whatever it is that it costs. So the Gemara, about 10 lines up on 52b, says the following. Right? And Almana is fed through the estate after her husband dies. So basically the estate supports her food bills. And Utsricha Rafua, if this Almana happens to have doctor bills and medication and therapy and all kinds of things that she needs for her health, right? Harehi kimizonos. That falls into the category of mizonos, meaning that comes through the pot that the husband left to support the whole family. Meaning there's two pockets over here. One pocket is the bank account that all the money is in to help out the kids, right? The Yisomim, right? And general food bills and Con Ed bills and rent and all kinds of stuff like that. And the other is her Kesuva, which directly goes to her, and that's his responsibility to her. So you could argue that because she needs this medicine, it could be taken out of her Kesuva. Now, obviously, she wouldn't be a fan of that, because then we have a problem of, right, she doesn't get enough because she's losing money from her Kesuva. So how do we deal with that? So the Gemara says, Rabbi Shimon and Gamliel Omer Refuah sheyesh lo kitzva nisrapus miksuvasa. So Rabbi Shimon and Gamliel makes a compromise. He says, well, it depends what kind of medication, i.e. what kind of bills. So if it's medication that is a one-timer, she had surgery right on her back, and now she has a year and a half of chiropractor bills and therapy, and she's got to go swimming, right? The whole thing is going to cost her $200,000. This is before Medicare, obviously. So everything's out of pocket, right? So she's got a $200,000 bill. That's basically like a one-time payment that's going to cover this whole surgery and rehab. So that 200 grand, says the Gemara, right? If it's a one-time payment, then it comes out of her ksuva. She'ein la kitzva harei kimizonos. What if this forever? She's going to have she has permanent damage. She has, I don't know, some kind of damage in her leg, right? She's crippled. She needs a wheelchair. She's going to need therapy pretty much for the rest of her life. So that money comes out of the bank account of the Yisomim, basically of the house account, not her personal money that's due to her for her ksuva. Okay, so that's the compromise that Rab Shimon Gamliel said. Rabbi Yochanan said, Asu hakaza dam be'eretz Yisrael. When it comes to bloodletting in the land of Israel, that's, you always need to bloodlet, right? Because whatever, for the rest of your life, when you get a checkup, right, your annual, your biannual, whatever it is, checkup, you always bloodlet. So that's something that is always going to be necessary, and therefore that's going to come out of the house account. Okay, says Rav Shimon Gamliel. So now we have an interesting story. Krevid Rabbi Yochanan habilahu itis abba. So Rabbi Yochanan had cousins, okay, and the cousins, the father of the cousins married a woman from outside of the family, and now she married someone of the cousins. Okay, she needed refuah. Okay, kol yom ha'asu l'kamed Rabbi Yochanan, and she used to approach Rabbi Yochanan every day, asking, "Nu, right? You know, these are your relatives. You seem to know, you seem to know a thing or two about this. So what say you?" Amar lahu, he told them, like, you have to put in words over here, basically like, she's going to be a real pain. Here's what I'm going to tell you to do. He said to them, to his family, to his cousins, Izulu kutzilo mi dila rofe. Here's what I'm going to tell you to do. Figure out a way to cause this to be a one-time lump sum payment, okay? i.e., wink, wink, it's those kind of payments that we just learned a minute ago, because they're a one-time payment, that's going to come out of her ksuva, and it's not going to eat away at the house account. Okay, so Rav Yochanan basically gave them advice. Okay, so that's meaning this is going to be a long-term surgery or long-term, long-term therapy, right? It's going to be forever, but do it in a way where you do a one-time payment. Okay, obviously to go around having the problem of taking all the money out of the house account. So Rabbi Yochanan later had remorse, and he said, Asinu atzmenu ke'orchei hadayanim. He said, now that I'm thinking about it, I transgressed the rule of not making yourself into an orech din. We'll see what that means. What does that mean? What's an orchei hadayanim? So we have to look in Rashi over here. Rashi says, Ka'orchei hadayanim, ohad echad mi balei din. Let's say a case, you have a court case, okay? So you have one person that Ruvain is suing Shimon for something. So there's a person out there who happens to favor Ruvain. Umatim zuchuyos of l'dayin, and what he does is he advocates for him. And he acts as his, we'll use the word for now, lawyer. And he basically takes his case, he decides to take his case, Ruvain's case, and he explains it to the judge. And he advocates for him, and he tells him why he thinks Ruvain is right, and he has a whole list of reasons why he thinks Ruvain is right. And he arranges his claims for the benefit of Ruvain, Mikre Orche Hadayanim. Someone who does that, i.e., takes someone's case and explains it well and shows why this litigant is the correct party. So that's called an orach din. She'orach hasadayanim lahapoch libam letova shel zeh. He preempts the judgment so that he kind of explains to the judge why he thinks Ruvain should win, which is pretty much what a lawyer's job is in a nutshell. He takes your case, he spends a lot of time looking into it, and if he decides to take your case, right, and your retainer, of course, he will preside over your case and do his best at giving it, his best shot. But he obviously, by taking your case, he thinks he could win by presenting it well to the judge. So that's exactly what Rav Yochanan did. What did he do? He advised, he advised his cousins, hey, here's what I'm going to tell you to do in order to prevent you guys losing a lot of money in your house account. So he has charata, he has remorse that he acted on their behalf as his advocate. That's what Rav Yochanan's problem was. Okay, so he felt bad. Okay, so why did he change his mind? Meaning, in the beginning, he had no problem advocating. Then one day he realized, he goes, you know what? I can't be an advocate. So what did he say in the beginning? So me'ikara myself or ulbasof myself. Why did he feel like he had to do tshuva? And change his mind. So me'ikara savar ubzarecha lo tisalam. First, he thought that what the pasuk in Yeshaya says that you should always, family matters, What do they say? Blood is thicker than water. One of those lines, When it comes to family, you should try to help them out as much as possible. So he kind of gave them advice to say, hey, listen, if you do it, if you structure the bills like this, where it's a one lump sum payment, it's beneficial to you guys because it's going to come out of a ksuva rather than take away the house account, the house money. Well, in the end, he said, that really wasn't such a nice thing because I have a reputation. And if it's found out that I favored, so to speak, my cousins over someone else, it's not right. It's not right for me to do that. People are going to look at me. So that's the story, the way it's presented over here. I found a very interesting Yerushalmi that gives the same story, but it's missing some details. And I want to say it because I would say a lot of times, because Yerushalmi isn't, very well known, but there are some times throughout Shas where there are stories. By the way, there are sometimes within Shas, within Bavli, where you have a story. We're actually going to get to that in about a week or so, the story of Rabbi Akiva, how he became rich, and his story, how he got married. So there's two versions. There's a version in Kesubos, I think Samech Beis or so. And then there's a version in the Dorim, I think it's on Daf Nun, where it leaves out a lot of details. So the question you ask is, which one is correct? The same is true between a Bavli and a Yerushalmi. I'm going to read the Yerushalmi, and we're going to see what the difference is. Tani Rab Shimon ben Gamliel. Rab Shimon ben Gamliel says the following. I'm reading from the Yerushalmi. Kol maka sheyesh la kitza misrapim miksuvasa, which is what we said. Meaning, if she has medical bills, that they're fixed, that money comes from her ksuva money. So far, so good. But if it has no fixed, it could go on forever and ever, that money comes from the estate. Kahada, like the following story. Chada Isa, there was a certain woman, Asas Lagabe Rav Yochanan. A woman came in front of Rav Yochanan. So it sounds familiar, but there's no cousins and there's nothing yet. So Amarla, he told her, Kitzatsu Asiech. He told her the following. He asked her the following. Did your doctor give a fixed price? That's what he asked her. There's a lot of things missing. right? He wanted to know, your doctor, you went to the doctor and he gave you an estimate. Did he give you a fixed price? So Amrale, she answered low, no. So that's the end of the story, okay? It doesn't say anything about relatives. It just says that he now, so what's he guilty of? So you ready for this? So here's what the Yerushalmi continues. So the Yerushalmi says, Lo kain amar Rabbi Chagai v'shem Rabbi Shua ben Levi al tas atzmach ka'orchei hadayanim, right? Don't you know that you shouldn't turn into an advocate? Comma, here's the kicker. Shelo legalos liyachid as dino, that one shall not disclose the judgment to a party. What does that mean? So it sounds from here, and this is debatable, it sounds from here that what was the problem of that? What did Rabbi Yochanan do? It wasn't that he either favored, right? Our Bavli said that he didn't favor her, right? Because she was married to one of the cousins. So he wanted to spare the cousins a potential, big hit to their house account. So here, the criticism on Rav Yochanan says is you can't be an advocate, right? Because what you're doing is you're disclosing the judgment to a party, which means don't hint to her which way she should go. By the fact that he told her, oh, by the way, did your doctor give you a fixed price? Meaning he's already hinting to her that there could be a big difference in how you structure this, right? Like a lawyer who structures a deal for you, right? And depending on how you do it has tremendous tax ramifications. Like this is Ma'aseh b'chol yom in business world, right? Depending how you structure something, you could get hit with taxes, or you could somehow not get hit with taxes. So here, Rav Yochanan what he's doing is he's kind of advocating to her and saying, make sure that you do this right. So what does the Gemara answer? How could he do this? So the answer, the reason why he said it this way, of course, Rabbi Yochanan knew that you can't be an advocate. So the Gemara ends off by saying, he knew her to be honest, meaning that she wasn't going to kind of evade and make sure to get a non-fixed bill, right? So that it gets out of the house, just so that the house pays for it and not her ksuba pays for it. He thought she would be honest, and whatever the doctor did, that was the way she was going to do it. So I'm just bringing this up because it's certainly a similar story, but the details are different. So I just thought that's very interesting to show you how you have one story in the Bavli and a similar story in the Yerushalmi lacking a lot of details, and you could maybe come to a different conclusion. But this happens frequently when you have Bavli versus Yerushalmi. So I just thought that was very cool. Now, let's get to the crux of the problem. Okay, what is the problem? Let's forget the Yerushalmi for a minute. Why did Rabbi Yochanan have a problem with becoming an advocate? Because this is from Pirkei Avos. I will read the beginning of Pirkei Avos. It's the first chapter in Pirkei Avos. Yehuda ben Tabai v'Shimon ben Shetach kiblu mehem. Yehuda ben Tabai omer altas atzmecha ka'orchei hadayanim. Do not play the part of an orech din. Okay, and the Mishnah goes on to say that when the litigants are in front of you, look at them as they were both guilty, and when they leave you, look at them as they were both innocent. Okay, forget about that for now. The key is don't make yourself like an orech din. Okay, that's the problem. That's why Rav Yochanan says to himself, "Oh my God, I made myself like an orech din," contrary to what Pirkei Avos advises. Right? He felt guilty. Right? He felt bad that he went against, right, a Beferisha Mishnah in Pirkei Avos. Okay, so as we always do, let us interpret what an orech din is, because it's not so clear. Not only is it not clear, it's heavily debated what it actually means. We take it for granted that it means a lawyer. So first of all, Rashi has a different way of spelling it. He spells it with an aleph. Okay, I'm just going to read a little bit of Rashi. He says, Kasav Mishnah ba'aleph, right? Umischalef ba'ayin, but you could also do it with an ayin. Here's what Rashi says. Umash meka'orchei hadayanim ka'adam hazeh she'eino dayan, someone who's not a judge, okay, umarichu misader lebal din ta'anosav, sounds like the Rashi in Kesubos, obviously it's the same author, someone who arranges and sets up the tainas for someone, like in Israel, they call it a toain, right? Or a toenet, or right, for an advocate for women, advocate for Bezdin, right? It's called a toain. Okay, and he quotes the Gemara in Kesubos that we just read. And he says that you shouldn't do it. Okay, why shouldn't you do it? He doesn't say why, but he gives another interpretation, and that's what Rashi says. Look in, so what exactly is the problem? So in Kesubos, he says, well, because you're going to try to influence the judge. Well, duh, that's what a lawyer's job is, right? If he didn't do that, then he wouldn't be doing his job. So it's kind of funny how we're saying something that's pretty obvious. But the Bartanura elaborates a little more. He says, like the judges, like those people that set up and arrange the claims of a litigant, as it is forbidden for a person to reveal the judgment to one of the litigants and say to him, do the following so that you'll win your case. So now we're digging a little bit deeper, right? Say this, say that. Is it really true, right? Our lawyers always, will leave the lawyer jokes out of it because I don't know who's listening, but right, lawyers tend to hyperbolize. And that's exactly why when you get a crafty lawyer, they, let's use the word embellish. Is that a word we could live with? The case, and it may not be 100% accurate. Halavai, it's 50% accurate. But all jokes aside, it may not be 100% accurate. So he says, hey, this is what to say because I know that judge, right? Like we say today, oh, I clerked for that Supreme Court judge for 15 years. I know his hot, or her, I got to be careful. I know her hot buttons, and this is what you say. And when you say those magic words, the judge is going to smile and you're going to win the case. Now, that's not so bad. So the problem is it's a gray area because the lawyer is telling you what to say, right? And so this is the way the Bartanura explains what the problem is, right? Do this so that you win the case, even though he knows that the litigant should win the case for another reason, but say this reason. So there's a little, right? So there's a little bit of, there's a little bit of fraudulence over here. Okay, so that's one way of explaining. He says another explanation, meaning, okay, no, that's something else that has to do with a non-Jewish court. So that's the Bartanura. I saw the Rabbeinu Yonah. The Rabbeinu Yonah on Pirkei Avos has always what to say. He says he says over here, Diber bekan misha melamid tainosav shel sheker lechavero v'liton bahem. So the Rabbeinu Yonah goes a step further. He says, forget about not 100%. He says you're going to read Varsheker Tirchak, which is Gemara in Shavuos Daf Lamed actually talks about this, where there is a sugya on Shavuos Daf Lamed, because the concept of a lawyer is not really spoken. I'm going to show you Masechah Shabbos. It mentions it a little bit, but the whole discussion whether you could have a lawyer or not in halacha is not even mentioned in Shas. It's mentioned in Rishonim and Masechah Shavuos Daf Lamed, Amud Beis on the bottom, but the greater sugya is not really discussed. But the Rabbeinu Yonah says the problem is you're going to definitely lie, and that's no good. Okay, so that's another potential problem. I saw an interesting commentary that I got from Sefaria called the Yane Levanon. Has anyone heard of the Yane Levanon? He was an 18th century German. He unfortunately ended up becoming a maskil, but his name was Naphtali Hertz Wesley. And in Hebrew, it looks like Wiesel or Wiesel. So I don't know, Anyway, he gave a interpretation on Pirkei Avos, and he has a whole long discussion. I'm just going to do a little bit of it. He says that there are many interpretations what an orech din is, and the whole discussion is whether it refers to what we've been saying the whole time as a lawyer, right? But he says it doesn't make sense that it's a lawyer. And he gives two big kashas on why he thinks that what everyone has been saying doesn't make any sense. And if you think about it, he's right. Because if it's like Rabbeinu Yonah who says, don't lie, like, again, this is Pirkei Avos. Pirkei Avos generally would not say something like, don't lie. Pirkei Avos is like Hasidus, is like, don't do things in the gray area. So, right? So you have to be above board. We don't need Pirkei Avos to tell us not to lie. Okay, so that's his first claim. Second, he actually brings down a Yerushalmi in Sanhedrin. Okay, talking about Yerushalmis, he says that Rav Huna when Rav Huna would see someone in court who didn't know how to really claim and give proper testimony, and there are people who unfortunately could be very smart, but they can't present their case, right? So the Gemara, the Yerushalmi says have a psachle. So Rav Huna would help people out present their case. Oh, what does that sound like? That sounds like our whole problem. You can't help someone present their case. So he says, so it sounds like you can be a lawyer, right? So that's the first step, right? That's the first, proof. And the second is, of course, he brings down our Gemara in Kesubos that we just had. But then, so he brings our Gemara in about Rav Yochanan. Now, Rav Yochanan wasn't a judge, but what does he say? He says, "Asinu atzmeinu ka'orchei hadayanim." Okay, what do you mean orchei hadayanim? The Tana Didan b'dayanim kamayri. He says, what is this Mishnah in Pirkei Avos? The Mishnah in Pirkei Avos is talking about judges. It's that whole Mishnah in Pirkei Avos. In Mishnah Zayin, talks about Orchei Dayanim. Then it says that when you're a judge, you should view them. That's why I said before, we're going to get back to it. You should view them as guilty when they're standing there, but innocent when they leave. And all of that whole Mishnah Zayin is referring to judges. So if referring to judges, then how could we be talking about a regular guy who's a lawyer, okay, who's not a judge? So therefore, his conclusion, after much discussion over here, he says, right? He says this is the way he learns what an orech din is. He says it's right. He says it's referring to a judge, not referring to a lawyer like how everyone else learns. So how could a judge not be like a lawyer? So what does that mean? Don't be orech hadin if you're a judge. He says even if you're very, very smart and you could advise, right? And you understand, you're like on the top level, you're in the Supreme Court, right? Don't be above the other judges who sit next to you to explain to them why you think that you're right, i.e., if you're a judge, don't influence other judges, okay? And think that you're, the supreme being over here, and try to convince everyone why your opinion is right. Like a lawyer would do. That's why he stresses the word ki, right? We just kind of glanced over that. He says, lo tiya ki orech din. Doesn't say orech din, it says ki. Ki in Hebrew is what we call chaf hadimyon. It's similar to. Don't be a judge and act similar to what a lawyer would do for his or her client. That's who we're talking about over here. So I thought that was very interesting over here. right? Because if you start influencing the other judges, then they're going to listen to you without them thinking on their own, and they're not going to, look deep into the case. And it's not right, because everybody, the rule is every judge has to view it with themselves, and the judges can't collude, right? They can't say, oh, well, what about like today, like when we have the jury, right? The jury goes into a room and they talk it out and they each, discuss whatever there is to discuss. But with us, our judges, they each see it in their own lens. And that's the beauty of the Jewish system. So I thought that was very, very good. And now the topic obviously today about lawyers is very interesting, because although most people do interpret the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos to talk about a lawyer, basically the Shulchan Aruch has what to say. I'm just going to read a few things from the Shulchan Aruch. There are certain times when you can. Basically, the Shulchan Aruch in 124, Kuf Chav Daled, limits when halacha permits the Baal Din to appoint a lawyer to plead their cases. So the Shulchan Aruch actually says that only the plaintiff is permitted to appoint an attorney, believe it or not. Okay, and the Mechaber says, right, that this allowance is only if the plaintiff is not present in the town where the Beis Din takes place. Like you send the lawyer, like for a traffic ticket, lahavdil, right? You don't go to court. You pay the lawyer $150. He pleads your case, right? The person never gets to see the judge. Sorry, $350, right? You never get to see the judge, and whatever. Like, who the heck wants to wait in court the whole day, right? So that's what the Mechaber actually talks about. He says you could only do it when the plaintiff is not around, so you send someone. Okay, the Shach, there's a very long Shach over there in Kuf Chav Daled that says that they didn't even permit the plaintiff to have a lawyer if the plaintiff was present at the Din Torah, right? Only Talmidei Chachamim and women have the option of choosing not to appear in court, because it's not right for a woman to be in court. Obviously today it's different, and it's not right for a Talmud Chacham to be in court. Okay, oh boy, we only have 10 minutes left. So that's basically what the Shulchan Aruch says. Today, of course, we all have lawyers, and right, just, you should know that it's not so simple. And, because, like I said before, that the lawyers like to embellish and kind of say things that may not necessarily have happened. And we're very strict in our system. So you could understand why halacha today could have a problem with, fabricating, your case and embellishing. So that's that. I wanted to talk a little bit about the Gemara later on in the Daf. The Gemara has a concept of Kesubos b'nin dichrin, okay, which basically says that the rabbis realized that, girls had to get married, right? Today we have a shidduch crisis, right? So back then they had their own kind of shidduch crisis. The crisis was, and I've mentioned this about a dozen times between Yevamos and Kesubos, that it was much harder for the woman to get married than the man to get married. Okay, that's the reality, right? I think that theme appears every week somehow. I don't do it on purpose, but it just seems to appear. So now, when the woman gets married, though, the Chachamim were worried that if her father gave her a nice big fat dowry, and if God forbid she were to predecease her husband, her children, okay, will not see that dowry that grandpa gave, because there's a good chance that there will be other children from other women. Remember, the man was allowed to marry many women. So this man could have 4 women, right? And each having, 7, you have 28 children. And because the mother, i.e. the daughter of grandpa, died, so all of that money and real estate and whatever and jewelry is going to get diluted amongst all the other of the husband's heirs. And that wasn't cool. So the Gemara says that the Chachamim stepped in and they made a condition in the Ksuva that basically said that there's a certain amount, right, or whatever they delineate, that whatever is given over is going to go to the male sons, okay, forget the daughters for a minute, are going to go to the sons of the woman, Okay, and that way the grandpa is going to be content that his dowry is going to continue on straight to his grandsons. Okay, so that has been in, that's called Kesubos bin Dichron in a nutshell. Okay, now the Gemara wants to know the following. That's a nice takana. The problem is, it seems like it's overriding a deoraisa. What does that mean? The Torah, when it talks about inheritance, is very, very specific, right? When Benot Tzlofchad came around, they were successful in a case where there were only daughters. But the problem is, if there were sons, okay, the daughters really didn't get. So what the Chachamim, it sounds like what the Chachamim are doing is they're creating a Yerusha over here, because after all, granddads don't live forever, right? So what's going to end up happening is this dowry that you're giving your daughter is very similar to a Yerusha. So if, for example, this grandfather has a daughter and 5 sons, right? So what's the rule? The rule is that the 5 sons split the whole inheritance and the daughter gets 0. That's how it works on a deoraisa level. Obviously, today we don't do it, but on a deoraisa, now if there's no sons and there's only daughters, then the daughters get first crack, thanks to Bnei Tzlofchad. But when there are, but she didn't have any brothers, so that's when the problem happened. But if there are sons, the sons get it. So the Gemara was worried that the Chachamim are making up an inheritance. Why? Because at the end of the day, this Kesubos bin Dichron is really a way of the father giving over a portion to his daughter, because that's what a dowry is at the end of the day. Plus, he doesn't have to die yet. They get a nachla, the sons get an inheritance when he dies. Here, she's not only getting a nice amount, but she's also getting it before he dies. And it's going to her, and it's getting passed down. So it seems like this is against the concept of sons inheriting. So the Gemara had a problem with that. And the Gemara answers on Nun Beis Amud Beis. If you see the Gemara about 15 or 18 lines up, right by the pasuk of Yirmiyahu. So the Gemara says, Hanami da'oraisa. About 12 or 13 lines up, the Gemara says, no, this concept of what? Making sure that your daughter has a dowry is also from the Torah. The Gemara says, really? Where does it say in the Torah? So it quotes a pasuk in Jeremiah. Now, we don't have time to talk about this in full, but is Yirmiyahu considered a deoraisa? Quasi, right? But nevertheless, it's strong enough that the Gemara had no other, right? Had no other option but to call it a deoraisa, because it says "K'chu nashim v'holidu banim uvanos v'k'chu livnechem nashim." Now, I know we don't have a lot of time because once again I blew it, but I'm going to do it anyway. I'm going to read Jeremiah 29 because it's very important to understand what the source is. Jeremiah 29 starts off by saying that there's a letter which Yirmiyahu sent from Yerushalayim to the rest of the prophets, to the community in Golus, right? The Jews were in Golus, okay, for 70 years. And Yirmiyahu basically sent like a letter of things that they should do, okay? It's a letter to all the people who Nebuchadnezzar had exiled from Israel, from Yerushalayim to Bavel, okay? And the letter says, this is what Hashem says, I'm in Yirmiyahu, Parak 29, Pasuk 5. Here's the letter. Yirmiyahu basically acts as their financial advisor. And he says the following, hey guys, you guys are going to be here for a long time. 70 years is like 3 generations or so. Here's my advice to you. Right? What does every Jew do historically after they could? Buy real estate. Okay? Buy real estate, build houses, plant gardens, eat the fruit. You guys are going to be here for a while. That's the first advice. Okay? After buy real estate, what do? you have to enjoy the real estate. How do you enjoy real estate? You have to have people residing in the houses. How do you have people? Chunashim, right? Take wives. V'holidu banim avanos, have lots of children, right? Be fruitful. U'chuliv nechem nashim, take wives for your sons. Ves benosechem tunu lanashim, and for your daughters, find husbands. V'teiladna banim avanos, and multiply like bunnies, and then, right, you'll be great, and then you'll come back to Yerushalayim, and there'll be lots of people, and Shalom al Yisrael. So the Gemara takes this pasuk. It's not only advice, it's a mitzvah. What's the mitzvah? So the Gemara analyzes this pasuk. You ready for this? The Gemara says, Bishlam abanim biyadei kaimi. What's his advice after the real estate? He says, hey, sons, marry women. So the Gemara says that makes sense because a male, right, a man has the option of asking a woman out, and the woman can say yes, and then they get married, right? Again, the male dominates over here, whether you like it or not. The male dominates, and he has the option of finding the wife. However, elabante mikaimin biyadeh. The problem with daughters is I can't tell my daughter who to marry because the daughter doesn't ask the guy out, the guy asks the daughter out. So how can I give advice to have daughters marry men when the men decide? It says kiikach ish isha, right? As we said hundreds of times, it's the man's world. So you can't tell the woman to marry a guy. Who proposes to who? The guy proposes to the girl. Even today, believe it or not, that hasn't changed. So the Gemara says, you know what the pasuk is saying? It's not instructing fathers to tell their women to start to be the one to propose and to initiate the relationship. No, you know what you're doing is make sure that you give the daughters what they need in order to get married. Hakamash mulan, the nilbeshe v'nichse, dress them, right? Make them look nice. Give them, right? Give them the money. Right? What do the husbands are going to look for? Okay, we're not going to debate what most men look for. It's either looks or money. It's 1A and 1B. Okay, that's the reality of it. And vasul v'nasfile, and that will promote them to get married. Obviously, they can't initiate a relationship, but it's up to the father to make sure that his daughter has a proper mate. And of course, money, right? Money talks, right? Or as Bob Dylan says, money swears, right? And that is going to be the cherry on top that's going to put her over the top while she's going to get married. So that's your d'oraisa source of this dowry, that the man should give his daughter enough that she should get married. By the way, the Gemara says v'yad kama. So how much are we talking about? The Gemara says, okay, you give up to 10% of the father's net worth. Now, what's very interesting about this, and I'm just going to go 5 minutes extra, is that this pasuk, okay, not only satisfies the source of this whole concept of b'nei dichrin, right, of giving your daughter a dowry and everything, the Gemara in Kiddushin uses it as a source for, there's a famous Gemara in Kiddushin, Daf Chavtes, that everybody learns in school, that talks about the things that the father is commanded to do for his son. What does he have to do? He has to give him a bris, la molo, liftoso, a pidyon aben, v'lilim Torah, to teach him Torah, ulahasio isha, and to marry off a woman, and to marry off his daughter, his son, right, to a woman, hopefully, ulalamda umnus, and to teach him umnus, right, to teach him a trade, to make sure that he's equipped to make money in the world. Beautiful Gemara. Hopefully, when we get to Kiddushin in a year and a quarter, whenever it is, we'll have a shir on Daf Chavtes, maybe a 2-hour shir. Anyways, so the Gemara wants to know what's the source. Where does it say anywhere that there's a mitzvah for a man to marry off his son? And this is what the pasuk used. It uses the pasuk from Yirmiyahu of what? of not the woman part, I'm sorry, not the daughter part, but the son part. K'hu nashim v'holidu banim. This is actually used as a mitzvah. Okay, now the Rambam doesn't consider this a mitzvah. The Gemara does, meaning it's a mitzvah to give a bris milah. It's a mitzvah to do pidyon haben. It's a mitzvah to teach your son Torah. Those are real, what we would call a mitzvah. This is, maybe we'll call it a hechsher mitzvah, like a half mitzvah. Obviously, because Puruvu is a mitzvah, but you can't accomplish Puruvu if you don't make sure that your son gets married. So anyways, so I thought that was very interesting how this same pasuk is used in that context. And I guess we'll stop there, but just one comment on this dowry that we discussed. It's not just a nice idea. Believe it or not, the Shulchan Aruch says that you have to do this. Meaning, if you are marrying off your daughter, you have a commandment and it's enforceable in court. If you want to not give your daughter any money to live, now today obviously is a little different. We don't give a dowry per se, we just basically support them as long as they need to be supported. Let's call it the way it is. But we don't give them a specific amount. We don't give 10% of you. I mean, what if your net worth is $1 million? You don't give her 100,000. It doesn't work that way. But the Rambam, by the way, I'm just going to read the Rambam and then the Shulchan Aruch. The Rambam says, "Tzivu chachamim sheiten adam min achasav ma'at." See what he says? You have to give a little bit over to your daughter, kadei shetinasabo, in order that she should get married and be somewhat appealing to a future chassan, that he doesn't think that only my parents are going to have to support. Right? The woman has to come with some money also into the marriage. B'zehu anikra parnasa. That's what the term, see, we use the word parnasa for something else, but in the Gemara's use of the word parnasa, and we had it already once in Kesubos, we're going to have it in the Samach Ches, I think, or Samach Daled, in about a week and a half from now. The term parnasa specifically refers to giving over that amount, that dowry to your daughter. And then the Rambam says you have to give her some clothing and you have to give a minimum. And it says at the end of the Rambam, B'medvar mamurim b'shahaya ha'av ani. This is if the Av, if you have just enough money, if you could scratch, right? If you scrape by, if you're wealthy, then you have to give in proportion to your wealth. Meaning there's a certain minimum that everyone has to give, but if you're wealthy, you can't use that minimum, right? The way we would say today, it's like your tax bracket, right? You have to give proportionate to the amount of income that you make. That's that. The Shulchan Aruch basically, in Even Ezer, goes on and elaborates, but this is a enforceable halacha that we have today. And I think